Então, uma boa tarde a todas e a todos. Nós vamos fazer só, por assim dizer, esta muito pequenina introdução em português. A partir deste momento vamos então passar o nosso registro para a língua inglesa. Vamos dar início então à nossa aula de hoje, em que, como também já havíamos conversado, temos connosco tanto a professora Dina, que nos vai fazer também a introdução a este ciclo de conferências. Falarmos um pouco não só do ciclo de conferências de estudos europeus, mas também do ciclo de conferências de Eixos interdisciplinares e do Doutoramento em Estudos Contemporâneos do 620, e depois eu irei apresentar o professor Jean-Michel Guieu, que nos vai falar exatamente sobre o renascimento da ideia europeia desde o fim da Segunda Guerra Mundial até aquilo que é o momento da fundação do Conselho da Europa. Sim.
Então, boa tarde a todas e a todos. Vou dar aqui uma breve frase em português e deixar-vos descansados, porque eu não vou voltar aqui à lecionação por agora de História da Integração Europeia, portanto vão ter a sorte de continuar com a professora Clara. E vou agora mudar para o registro de inglês, para assim que a conferência irá prosseguir. So, thank you very much for your presence. Welcome you all to this conference. It's a pleasure for me to open this conference with Professor Jean-Michel Guieu, to whom I thank very, very much for accepting this invitation and for being here, sharing his research and his knowledge about the history of European integration. I'm very sorry that I cannot speak French because I can speak French, but it will be a very bad French. With these years of research, we engage with the English or with the supremacy of the English or so on in the academic language. And so we will proceed like this. So this conference is organized in a cooperative initiative between the Center for Interdisciplinary Studies and between the section of European Studies in the Department of History, European Studies, Archaeology and Arts of the Faculty of Humanities of the University of Coimbra. And this conference, particularly in the context of the CEIS-20, the Center for Interdisciplinary Studies, is integrated in a conference cycle to which we call Axis of Interdisciplinary Knowledge. This is a series of great conferences which are composed of international entities, which are specialists in several areas, and we want to cross both the audience, the general audience of the Center of the Interdisciplinary Studies, of the European Studies here at the faculty, but also to cross with the public of our PhD in the Center for Interdisciplinary Studies. So in the name of the coordination of the CEIS-20 and also in the name of the coordination of the PhD of the CEIS-20 and also in the name of the coordination of the Bachelor in European Studies, I thank very much again to Professor Jean-Michel Guieu, which is holding the conference with the title The Rebirth of the European Idea from the World War II to the Foundation of the Council of Europe. This subject, although it is very located in a certain chronological period, it allows us to think the rebuilding of Europe after the Second World War, and it also allows us to take several reflections about the following of the Second World War. And also, I'm confident too that it will allow you to make some reflections even of our Europe of today. So Second World War was a closed episode, but war, as we can see, is not a closed event in Europe, unfortunately. So this is also the aim of this conference, of these conferences in this cycle in the Eixos, but also the aim of the cycle of conferences in European Studies at the section of European Studies at the faculty, is that the conferences allow us to have critical knowledge, critical thinking about the world that surrounds us, not only to use specifically in your assignments, but also to allow us to have a broader knowledge about the world surrounding us. So thank you very much again, Professor Jean-Michel Guieu. Thank you very much for your presence. And now I give the floor to Clara to present the Professor Jean-Michel. Thank you.
So good afternoon to you all. I begin to thank the presence of the colleagues here present, especially Professor Dina Sebastião, on behalf of the Center for Interdisciplinary Studies and the PhD in Contemporary Studies of the same center, coordinator also of the first cycle of European Studies of this faculty. Dear students, cher Jean-Michel Guieu, dear colleagues. First of all, thank you very much for accepting our invitation to be here today. Professor Jean-Michel Guieu is Senior Lecturer in Contemporary History at the University of Paris I, Paris Panthéon-Sorbonne. His main research interests concern the study of pacifism and pro-European activism, the League of Nations, and the history of international law. He has published Le Rameau et le Glaive, Les militants français pour la Société des Nations, and other books, for example, Gagner la paix 1914-1929. He was also co-editor of several volumes on Le Congrès de l'Europe à l'Aïe 1948-2008, Le Défenseur de la paix 1899-1917, La paix dans la guerre, Histoire et expérience de paix 1914-1919. This conference is included also in the conference series of European Studies. And the conference is also promoted by the Axis of Interdisciplinary Knowledge lecture series of the PhD in Contemporary Studies, promoted by the Center for Interdisciplinary Studies, Eixos. On behalf of the conference organization, I would like to thank the institutional and financial support given to this conference by the Center for Interdisciplinary Studies and by the Department of History, European Studies, Archaeology, and Arts of the Faculty of Arts and Humanities of the University of Coimbra. Professor Jean-Michel Guieu is going to talk us about the rebirth of European idea from World War II to the foundation of the Council of Europe. Once again, thanks very much for your presence with us today. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, dear students, dear class, thank you very much for your introduction. I hope that you will understand my poor English. You know, I'm French, so I speak bad English, and I speak no Portuguese, so I apologize for that. The title of my presentation is somehow strange, but I think we have to concentrate on this short period of time, that is to say from 1945 to 1949. It is a short period far from our present time, but it was a time after a total war. Everything was possible to rebuild a new Europe. So all the waves of the European integration were open, and we will see that it was not that easy to begin the European construction. There were at this time a huge support among the public opinion in favor of the European construction. But what kind of Europe? I think it's still the main question. What kind of Europe do we want? And this question was very important after the Second World War. I think that this period from 45 to 49 is sometimes missing in the textbooks. You have probably read on the history of Europe, the history of European integration. The traditional narrative of the European construction too much focuses on the European communities, that is to say, EEC and ECSC. And I think that studying the European projects of the immediate aftermath of the Second World War is an opportunity to reinsert the history of the ACSC, EEC into an overall history of international relations and European construction, accounting for all the projects and achievements relating to Europe's unity since 1945. You know that post-war periods are particularly favorable to the affirmation of the European idea, and the quest for peace has long been a powerful engine of the European construction. After the First World War, there was already a first golden age of the European idea, characterized by a profusion of initiatives and movements for Europe. But these projects hardly translated into concrete reality. The economic and political crisis that struck the continent during the 1930s hastened the failure of this first pro-Europe movement. In turn, the Second World War strongly revived a European awareness, and pro-European activism knew then a second golden age that will be at the center of my today's presentation. But to which extent did this tide of pro-European opinion lead to the first European institutions? Didn't the beginning of the Cold War act as a more powerful spur to the first European construction than these pro-European movements? I shall try to give you some answer to these critical questions. First of all, I will begin with the Second World War itself, because during the war, reflection continued on the organization of Europe, and Nazi Germany, victorious Germany, presented itself as the champion of European unification and of the new European order, as they called their project for Europe. The Third Reich wanted to organize its newly conquered territories along the lines of a united Europe, that would be dominated by Germany, and this vast European economic and commercial area they were calling for would be entirely being at the service of the German economy. German propaganda exalted the values of Western civilizations, as you can see on these posters, which it claimed it was defending against Bolshevism and Anglo-American imperialism. These discourses on the new Europe helped Germans gain the confidence of certain collaborators in occupied European countries. Some of them had been sincere Europeanists in the 1920s and still believed in a Franco-German rapprochement to build a united Europe. But this new order promoted by the Nazis did not discourage other resistant groups, intellectuals and politicians in exile to support European unity too. In London, the capital of European resistance, various plans for a European federation were drawn up, but the only concrete achievement was the creation of a customs union between Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg, whose convention was signed on the 5th September 1944. It was called Benelux, and it established a tariff community between these three countries and envisaged in the long term the creation of an economic union between the three countries. Transnational contacts between the various resistance movements were also established during the war, notably in Switzerland. For instance, refugees and resistance fighters of several European countries, France, Denmark, Italy, Netherlands, etc., met secretly in Geneva in the spring and summer of 1944 and published in July 1944 a manifesto entitled Declaration of European Resistance Movements. You can read some extracts of this text calling for a federally based Europe after the war. We can read some part of this text. Quotation: the members of the resistance movements maintain that the life of their people must be based upon respect for the individual personality, security, the planned exploitation of economic resources for the benefit of the whole community and the autonomous development of national life. These aims cannot be achieved unless the different countries are willing to give up the dogma of the absolute sovereignty of the states and unite in a single federal organization. So you can see the very pro-federal Europe of this resistance. But of course, these resistant fighters were not that much in the resistance movement, but they had a strong influence, and this text circulated among the resistance movements at the end of the Second World War. But in the aftermath of the war, these pro-European resistance fighters were not in position in their countries to answer the triumph of their ideas, because resistance failed to become a cohesive political force after the end of the war. Hence, some of them joined federalist groups like French Henri Freinet, one of the protagonists of the French resistance, or founder of the movement Combat, one of the main resistance movements in France, who became president of the European Union of Federalists, created in 1946. Winston Churchill, a former prime minister and hero of the war, was the man who played a crucial role in our story in putting the theme of European unification back on the agenda of international politics. His speech delivered on the 19th September 1946 at the University of Zurich, you can see a picture, calling for a United States of Europe, caused a great sensation in Europe because of the figure of Winston Churchill. And Churchill proposed a kind of United States of Europe based on a partnership between France and Germany, which was somehow audacious just after the war, which was marked by the opposition between France and Germany. And if you read the text, you see that Churchill was using the term United States of Europe, but in fact, it was not federal Europe. He was calling for not a federal transfer of sovereignty, and it was a kind of intergovernmental association, and without the involvement of Great Britain. He rather saw Great Britain among the friends, he said, and sponsor of the New Europe. So if you read, you can see the terms of United States of Europe and the term of Council of Europe, which is a very English approach of the European project councils. And this speech by Churchill was very important to mobilize public opinion, and Churchill commissioned his son-in-law, Duncan Sandys, you can see, to organize a pro-European movement called United Europe Movement. Churchill was in favor of a United Europe, not a federal Union. I will come back on this term because they are very important at this time, because we had choice between a intergovernmental Europe or a federated Europe. And this movement, United Europe Movement, was organized in Great Britain in May 1947. And this movement gathered politicians, church officials, trade union representatives, scholars, but it developed predominantly in the conservative and liberal milieu. And contacts were established in France to bring about a similar initiative, which resulted in the creation, you can see, of a French Council for a United Europe, the French version of this British movement. And this movement that was chaired by French former minister Raoul Daudry. But at the same time, there was a full number of federalist groups. Nowadays, it's difficult to imagine the number of federalist groups that came out of the war. And all these movements, there were about 50 federalist movements that united in 1946 in Paris, and they founded the Union of European Federalists with big name of this time: Henri Freinet, the French resistance fighter; Eugen Kogen, a German anti-Nazi; Hendrik Bruxmans, Dutch pro-European Federalist; Alexandre Marc, French, etc. And Altiero Spinelli, very famous anti-fascist resistance. And you had also other movements with strong political orientation, like Christian Democrats, which play a major role in the development of European federalism. They established in June 1947 a Christian Democratic Association called La Nouvelle Équipe Internationale, and that means new international teams. Socialists were also involved in the European construction. They built a transnational group, which was called the Socialist Movement for the United States of Europe. This movement was created in England, but it was soon spearheaded by French in close collaboration with the French Socialist Party. And this group had very famous socialist politicians like André Philippe, a French politician, Paul-Henri Spaak, who is the main founder of the European construction, Italian, and so on. There was also the initiative of a very well-known pro-European activist during the interwar period, Count Richard Coudenhove-Kalergi, from Austrian origins, and he wanted to mobilize the parliamentary community in favor of the European unification. In November 1946, he sent a questionnaire to more than 4,000 Western European members of parliament about the question to establish a European federation within the framework of the United Nations. And he received many positive replies. You can see the document is in French, but you can see the number of answers, and he received from many parliamentarians among Europe. And then he was able to hold a gathering in Gstaad, where he lived at this time. And this gathering decided to create a new group, a European Parliamentary Union. So we can say that Richard von Coudenhove-Kalergi is kind of a great father of the European construction. And there were also initiatives in some economic and commercial milieu, like the creation of an independent league for European cooperation, which was organized in March 1947 by former Belgian Prime Minister Paul van Zeeland and by another politician, Joseph Rettinger. This group was in favor of an economic construction of Europe, and it brought together economists, bankers, managers. So with these numerous groups in favor of European unifications, you see that there was a huge divisions between unionists, people we want a united Europe, and federalists who wanted a supranational Europe. But these groups were acting in a special context marked by the beginning of the Cold War. And this Cold War had a profound effect on the creation of the first steps of the European unity, because Europe found herself at the heart of the struggle between the two superpowers. And American journalist wrote in 1948 that if the countries of Western Europe have moved faster toward unity in 2 years than in the previous 2 centuries, the driving force is not Mr. Churchill, it is Mr. Stalin. In fact, the beginning of the Cold War had a profound effect on the first steps of this European construction, because after the coup de Prague in February 1948, when communists in Czechoslovakia seized power, the French and the British governments, joined by the governments of the Benelux countries, signed in Brussels a pact that marked the start of European military cooperation. The Brussels Pact, its main goal was to show that Western European states could cooperate, and thus encouraging the United States to play a role in the security of Western Europe. But this pact not only provided for the organization of military cooperation, but also in the economic, social, and cultural realms. And this is not very well known, but it is important to mention that it was not only military organization, but this economic dimension was eventually taken over by other organization that I will speak about in a few moments. Second step, that was the question of the Marshall Plan. You know, it was a famous speech by the US Secretary of State, George Marshall, in June 1947. And this plan was proposed to European countries to gradually reestablish trade flows in Western Union. But American demanded that Western Europe nations meet and formulate a joint recovery program instead of proposing different national recovery programs. So US preferred a continental marketplace than different isolated countries calling for the American help. And so 16 European countries accepted the American aid, including Portugal, and they gathered in Paris in July 1947 to a conference. And the objective of this conference was to determine Western European requirements for assistance. And on the 16th April of 1948, there's 16 countries signed a convention establishing the Organization for European Economic Cooperation. West Germany joined this organization, and the headquarters was set up in Paris, in the 16th district of Paris. While US and French authorities attempt to give this new organization supranational powers, these efforts were obviated by Britain. Britain promoted the foundation of an intergovernmental institution, and they opposed the wishes of the US, who wanted to create an integrated Europe and to create a European customs union. By signing this convention, the different countries were under the pressure of the US, and then the OEEC liberalized intra-European trade, and the EC, for instance, adopted a code of liberalization of trade, by which member countries bound themselves progressively to eliminate quota restrictions. They also created a European Payments Union in September 1950. And this union facilitated the convertibility of European currencies by setting exchange rates that were deemed to reflect the reality of each country's economic situation. The OEC remained, however, an organization for intergovernmental cooperation that was unable to create a customs union. That was a big disappointment for the US, which had expected to create an integrated Europe. And at this time, surveys showed a broad support from the European population for the project of European unity. This survey was published by the magazine Time, the famous magazine Time, and you see that even in Britain, France, there was about 2/3 of the population who wanted a European constitution. The question which has been asked was, generally speaking, are you in favor of the idea of a Western European Union against the idea, or haven't you made up your mind about it yet? And you see that in many countries, you had in Britain, in France, in Germany, you had important support for this idea. So maybe the time has come to organize something more ambitious, and the pro-European movement I presented a few minutes ago were now desiring to organize a large-scale events to support the European ideal. The movements were very numerous, so they had to organize, they had to create a kind of European unity among the European movements. And the Federalists were convinced at this time that time was right for a Federalist reorganization of the people of Europe, and they were calling to Estates General of Europe, something very ambitious. That is a process that would lead to the development of united Europe with the help of a constituent assembly. But for the Unionists, led by the British and by Duncan Sandys, these plans were too dangerous. They don't want Estates Generals of Europe. They prefer a Congress of Europe. That is to say, not a constituent assembly, but the convening of a conference between 500 and 800 prominent Europeans in order to pressure and encourage the European governments to take the first steps toward the unification of Europe. So this movement created an international committee of the movement for European unity, and the goal of this committee was to establish more effective action and collaboration between all these various pro-European movements. And they decided to organize a Congress at The Hague. Why the choice of this country of The Hague? It was a means of paying tribute to the pioneering role played by the three Benelux countries. And this is a Dutch Catholic member of parliament, Peter Kerstens, who was vice president of the Independent League for Economic Cooperation. He was appointed chairman of the organizing committee of this Congress. And the idea was to recruit leading European figures capable of giving life to the concept of European unity. So in each country of Europe, a national committee was set up, which in the final instance decided on the choice of the delegates. In order to establish the Portuguese delegation to the Hague Congress, the vice president of the International Committee of the Movements for European Unity, Henrik Broekmans, a Dutchman, he visited Spain, he visited Portugal in mid-January 1948, but this visit was for him, had for him a kind of cooling effect, because he was received by the minister, the Portuguese Minister of Foreign Affairs, and he commented that, contrary to what happened in Spain, we had not seen any interest in European construction here in Portugal. As a result, Portugal did not have any official observers at the Congress, which took place in The Hague in May 1948. This Congress was chaired by Winston Churchill himself, and this Congress was held in a prestigious room, that is to say the Ridderszaal, the nice hall in The Hague, and this event was officially opened by the Princess Juliana of the Netherlands and her husband. So this event gathered about 17 countries and also observers from Eastern Europe and also of the USA. As you can see, the major delegations came from France and Great Britain, but also Belgium, Netherlands, and Germany. At this time, you know that Germany was occupied by the Allied forces, and they had to negotiate with the authority, with the Allied authority, to have the permission, the right to go to The Hague. But among the German delegation was Konrad Adenauer, who will be one of the famous chancellor of Germany. These delegations were very varied in their composition. They included the prime minister, former prime minister, also French, for instance, the future president of the French Republic, François Mitterrand. At this time, he was minister of the Fourth Republic in France. There were also academics. There were pro-European activists and artists, and it was a big conference. And this conference has a big resonance because notably Winston Churchill participate in a mass rally in Amsterdam, and he was so famous at this time that among 20,000 people greet him in Amsterdam. So there was a big press coverage of this period. About 250 journalists attended the Congress in The Hague. And at this time, most of the comments in the press were very positive about this event. The work of this Congress was shared among 3 committees: the Political Committee, Economic and Social Committee, and Cultural Committee. I will show you the main resolutions of this Congress. The Political Committee was chaired by the French socialist Paul Ramadier. And you see that this Congress adopted a political resolution ambitious, because you can see that the Congress was calling for the transfer and merge of a portion of the sovereign rights of countries. They demand the convening of European Assembly, chosen by the parliaments of the participating nations, and this was one of the main resolutions taken by the Congress. There was also an economic resolution, but you know, in the economic sphere, it was difficult to act because they already have been created some organization, the OEC, and so. But the Congress, you know, recognized that no attempt to rebuild the economy of Europe upon the basis of rigidly dividing national sovereignty can prove successful. And the Congress affirms that urgent need for an economic union in Europe. So the Congress was very aware of troubles in the European economic and the commercial flows that had been interrupted by the war. So the agenda was very important at this time in terms of economic reconstruction of Europe. And then something very special, because you know, culture in the European construction has not played the same role than economy. So the Congress had a committee specially devoted to the cultural aspect of the European construction. And you see that this Congress wanted to establish three main institutions: a European Center for Culture that would promote an awareness of European unity, a European Institute for Childhood and Youth Questions, the importance of youth in these matters, and also a Supreme Court, that is to say, the role of law in the building of European unity. You know, I read the Supreme Court with supra-state jurisdiction to which citizens and groups can appeal and which is capable of assuring the implementation of the Charter. I will come back on this topic, but I think it's very important because it has been in the result the creation of European Convention on Human Rights, and I think it's part of the European project. What were the consequences, the immediate consequences, and the follow-up of this Congress? First of all, this was the creation of the European movement, which still exists, and it was one of the main achievements of the Congress, because there were different movements, plenty of movements, and plenty of European movements, and this movement was created in October 1948. And its aim was to coordinate the activities of the various existing international organizations. And the movement adopted a flag, almost the same flag than in the Congress of The Hague, but the flag has become green, because red was at this time the color of the USSR, and you can see the influence of the Cold War on the choice of a European flag. It became green after having been red. The European movement wanted to be very active on the question of the European integration, and they organized many events on this theme. On this theme, sorry. One of the main delegate of this conference of the Congress of Europe in The Hague wrote in his memoir that that in The Hague we laid the foundations for all that was to mark the progress of the European idea in the next decade. I quoted Joseph Ratzinger. I think this vision is a bit excessive, because in The Hague, the Congress did not lay all the foundation of the future Europe, but it led to the first institution, some private and some other public institution. Some private institution is the European Center for Culture that still exists in Switzerland. The idea was to establish a permanent European Center for Culture. It was asked by the Congress of Europe, and the European movement immediately established a planning board to make the basis for the creation of this institution. And first of all, they organized a European conference on culture that was held in Lausanne, in Switzerland, in December 1949. And this European conference on culture convened by the European movement, brought together a wide variety of cultural circles, more than 200 participants from 23 countries, which is very remarkable at this time. And this conference in Lausanne approved the project of created a European Center for Culture. This center was chaired by famous Swiss intellectual and writer Denis de Rougemont, and you can see him at the inauguration of the center in Geneva in October 1950. One other achievement of this period was the creation of the Council of Europe. I think it's important to speak about this organization because you remember that the Congress of Europe called for the creation of an assembly, and the International Committee of the Movements for European Unity tried to put pressure on governments for the implementation of this political resolution of the Hague Congress of Europe. And the Hague Congress advocated for the convening of this European Assembly. So in July 1948, the International Committee approved a memorandum which stated that the Assembly would have to meet by the start of 1949 at the latest. So they put pressure on the government to create this Assembly as soon as possible. And the committee brought this memorandum to the various foreign ministers of Europe, and notably the ministers of the Brussels Pact, who were attending a meeting in The Hague. And the French Minister of Foreign Affairs, Georges Bidault, who was a member of this Brussels Pact, proposed to his colleagues to accept the proposition of the European movement to convene a European Parliament assembly for an exchange of view of the problem of Europe Federation and for the preparation of a European Economic and Customs Union. But the colleagues of Bidault, this is to say the British or the Dutch minister, do not agree with this proposal. They found it too premature, and they consider that the pro-European movement had first to specify the modalities of for the convening of such an assembly, and to determine the methods of operation of such an assembly. So the European movement held that proposition, and it sent another memorandum, more precise, to organize the convening of such an assembly. And French and Belgian governments gave immediately their support to this initiative. And in September 1948, they submitted to the other governments of the Brussels City the proposal for a European Assembly as set out in the memorandum of the European movement. so the British government viewed this Franco-Belgian initiative with many reservations, because the British preferred an intergovernmental council to an assembly. And it would be very difficult for the various European governments to find an agreement on this question. The British delegation wanted a European Council which would operate on the basis of unanimity and would consist of representatives of the governments of the five, not members of the European parliaments. But in the same time, Belgian and French delegation proposed the creation of a more ambitious European Consultative Assembly, which would be representative of the various currents in public opinion and would be open to all the European nations. So there were long discussions, long debates among the Franco-Belgian delegates and the British delegates. And at the end, they agreed on kind of a compromise. They tried to find a compromise between the two positions, and they proposed to create a double institution within the Council of Europe. First, a committee of ministers, which meet in private, and a consultative body, which would meet in public. And the committee of ministers would have the sole power to make recommendations to the governments. So the British imposed the idea that the assembly was under the domination of the committee of ministers. The five of the Brussels Pact enlarged the conversation with other European countries. Denmark, Italy, Norway, Sweden, Ireland were part of the discussion leading to the creation of the Council of Europe in May 1949. The Statute of the Council of Europe was signed in London in 1949, and the English Prime Minister suggested that the Council of Europe would have its seat in Strasbourg, in France, because Strasbourg was a symbol of Franco-German rivalry, but it was at this time a city somewhat remote from the main Western European communication routes, and it was for the British government a means to give less importance to this new consultative assembly. And you know, in the discussions, the French had to make considerable concessions to the British negotiators, because the French wanted to create a kind of a European federation. But at the end, it was a very small organization that came out of these discussions, Council of Europe, that is to say, a purely intergovernmental organization. Only free and democratic states could affiliate this new organization, which excluded the communist countries and all the authoritarian states like Spain or Portugal. And you know probably that Portugal joined the European Council not until 1976. Among the achievements of the first years of the Council of Europe, at its inaugural session in Strasbourg, the Assembly of the Council of Europe adopted a resolution on human rights, that was quickly taken up by the Committee of Ministers, and on the 4th of November 1950 in Roma, the foreign minister signed the European Convention on Human Rights. And this convention entered into force in September 1953. And this institution were responsible for enforcing the obligation undertaken by the contracting state. There was an European Commission of Human Rights, a European Court of Human Rights, and a Committee of Ministers of the Council of Europe. There were three institutions responsible for enforcing these obligations. The Assembly also do not hesitate in building various other plans for the unification of Europe. They debated on they discussed on the poles for European transport, public health, agricultural production, even a common market for economic cooperation between the member states. So the Assembly was at the role of engine for the European construction. At this time, they were looking for different proposals to build European unity. They even thought of a federal political authority in the early 50s, but this political Europe did not take place at this time. You know, the way forward political Europe. Sorry, no, I come to the point later. From these formative years, from 1945 to 1949, I think that the European project acquired three important characteristics that would mark the European history for a long time. First of all, the European construction was westernized. This is the westernization of the European awareness, because the Cold War, as you see, had a very important role in the construction of the European Union. The context of the Cold War was very determinant, and the American journalist was right in saying that Stalin was one of the fathers of Europe. A bad father of Europe, but in fact he was a father of Europe, because the Western countries had to cooperate just to resist communism. The European project at this time also took a mainly economic dimension, because the political construction of Europe was not possible at this time. The building of a political Europe did not occur in this early 1950s, and it was, in fact, a big disappointment for the federalists who had the sort of very ambitious Europe. They did not succeed in transforming the European Assembly in a very constituent assembly. They did not turn the assembly in a very political Europe. And I think the third character of this period is the impossibility to build Europe on the Franco-British couple. because at this time all the discussion brought together British and French. The Council of Europe was of British and French origins. The Congress of Europe in The Hague in 1948, the main delegations were the French and the British. At the OEC, British and French were the main countries, and the differences of their point of view was a real problem for the European construction. And at this time, some witnesses of this period told that the spirit of the Hague was fading. For instance, Henry Brickman, the Dutch federalist, wrote that 2 years after the Congress of Europe, it could be said that the spirit of the Hague was dead. The Hague had become a memory, a nostalgia. It ceased to be a driving force. And in fact, the European dynamic could no longer come from the enthusiasm shown at the Hague Congress or from the action of the pro-European movements. And now the European dynamic would be fueled by another method, not unionism, not federalism, but the functional integration that Jean Monnet proposed in the famous Schuman Declaration of May 1950. And I think the functional method succeeded in overcoming all the confrontations of the Hague between the unionists and the federalists, between liberals and trade unionists, between British and French, and this the new method proposed by the French and by Jean Monnet was an alternative of all the proposals made after the Second World War, but in fact it was more efficient in building a small Europe, because the Council of Europe was more ambitious. At the beginning, there were 10 countries member, but its vocation was to open to other countries. And but the Council of Europe was not able to create a real political Europe, and the OEEC was not able to make a real economic integration. So the functionalist method was a means to make real progress toward a more ambitious Europe based on real transfers of sovereignty. And this Europe, that is to say, the European community, was was a means to reconciliate French and German, which was the hope of Winston Churchill in 1948 or 6. When he had his speech in Zurich, or in 1948 when he chaired the Congress of Europe. So I did a very quick survey of this period. I hope that you had understood me, and that you will have some questions to complete this presentation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much for the brilliant presentation. Now we will open our class, our session to the debate. You may put some questions if you have questions. We hope so. Professor Jean-Michel is here. Ask, please, whatever you want. If there is any doubt about the conference, about his explanation, about this period, if you have any question, please. Okay, please, can you tell us your name?
Thank you for your presentation, especially how many different and small movements and initiatives there were after the Second World War. My question basically revolves around the Marshall Plan that you touched upon too. Because what I was thinking on this time was you had the division by the Berlin Wall, you had the huge East Bloc as it was called. And in the West, we did not even have a system debate, or that's my feeling during that time where we wanted, of course, to consolidate European peace again. But there was not even a momentum to talk about what the flaws of the capitalist idea behind the Marshall Plan were. Because, of course, in the end, not only 13 billion euros dollars were exported, but also a set of fostering very harsh freedom of market and capitalist idea that America needed in order to trade again with the very much broken part of Europe. So my question basically is this: within all these small movements and initiatives, you talked about some socialist movement, but was there an actual debate that maybe was a little bit more diverse than what we could see from this whole rhetoric of values and European Western?
Thank you so much. More questions? Tina, please.
Not very much.
Anyone?
Personal.
No?
Thank you very much for your very interesting talk. My question is in the following of the previous question, which is actually we have a socialist movement for the European Union, and also within the socialist parties, and even in the French Socialist Party, we have some ideas to build the socialist Europe and to put supranational way the planning of the economy. I think when you mentioned that it was not popular.
Paul Ramadier, no. Bidou.
He was involved on that. So, how strong was these ideas inside the Council of Europe? How did it? Was there an opportunity to actually build some proposals? Do you have some idea about this? Because then we actually lost the real politics.
Okay. We have another question there.
Certainly, thank you for your presentation. My question is, at some point you showed us a poll with several people of several countries sentences for entering for constituted with sort of project. And my question is, for instance, show British and Switzerland, they really want to participate on that project, or they accepted that the project was needed within or without them or without them.
Thank you so much. We have 3 questions.
Okay, I try to understand the question, and thank you for your questions. About the Marshall Plan, I think I tried to show that the economic resolutions of the Congress of Europe was of a very liberal orientation. There was a consensus within all the Western political parties in Europe. Even the socialists prefer to build a European Union than a socialist European Union, because they thought that the most important was to preserve Europe from Bolshevism, and you know, at this time the USSR was a very concrete threat for European people, and all this. I think that the economic aspect of the European construction was not in debate at this time in Western Europe. On the contrary, the political project was very different from socialists and federalist socialists or Christian Democrats who were in favor of federal Europe. On the contrary, British-orientated movements and unionists want to build a Europe very respectful of the sovereignties. So the debate was on the political matters and not on the economic matters. I think in Western countries, you have the big, like in France and Italy, big communist parties, but they were backsided by the. For instance, in France, in 1947, communists were expelled from the government. So the Western government were in favor of liberal Europe. Inside the OEEC, the Organization for Economic Cooperation in Europe, the debate was to create a more integrated Europe. And the British at the time were experienced labor government, and Bevin and the British government was very cautious about too integrated Europe. They were very reluctant to the creation of a single market in Europe, whereas the French were in favor of the American position of a European market really integrated and without customs barriers. So, you know, the US counted on the British to build a European single market, and they were very disappointed by the British behavior, and so they put pressure on the French to build a European market. So it's a bit astonishing, but it's the reality. As regard with Bidault and Guieu was not socialist. He was center right at this time, but we can say that center right political parties had a prominent activity in favor of Europe, and that's why the British government was a bit afraid by this continental Europe governed by social democrats, by conservative people, and so there was a kind of division between England and its labor experience and the Europe of the defeated states, France, Germany, Italy, whose governments were led by Christian Democrats. So I do not remember exactly your question on this topic, but I think that there was a kind of consensus from socialist to center right in favor of European construction. That is to say, the division was made by the Cold War effects on political parties, and the main division was between communist and non-communist parties, more than because these political forces were united by the experiment of the resistance, and even if the resistant fighters were not able to impose their ideals after the war, I think their ideals survived in this political parties, and that's what I can say on this topic. I'm not sure I have answered your question, but I tried. I do not remember. I did not notice your question exactly. If you
How did the public opinion in
yes.
England and Switzerland?
I think public opinion was open to the European idea at this period, because everything was to create. There was nothing at all. The first survey showed that the public opinion was ready for a European construction, but when you ask precisely to the population, the opinion, the public opinion, the question of what kind of Europe, you had various answers, and that is to say, they were in favor of European construction, but they were divided on the way according to which this construction could be made. So there is not a real unity of the public opinion, but this opinion was a bit under the trauma of the war, the feeling of a kind of decrease of Europe, the idea of decadence of Europe, and they want to react. It was, the old Europe facing the struggle of the two superpowers, and I think it was a driving force to give the people the idea of European construction. I think it was a major engine for the idea of European construction. And peace also was one of the big motors of this feeling, because the Franco-German affrontment was something to overcome, and many political leaders, Churchill, but not only Churchill, thought that this problem has to be solved. Otherwise, we will have another war, and that's why I can say it's big issues. So I try to answer that.
Okay, thank you so much. Well, we are on time at the end of our session here. We are at the end of our class today. We thank you so much, Jean-Michel, for your presence here today with us, for sharing your knowledge with us, for sharing this journey, for taking us from the traumas of the Second World War until the creation of the Council of Europe, and to making us reflect on the consequences of the Council of Europe, to making us reflect on these subjects, and to making us reflect, and we can reflect from now on about the present and about the future of European Union. Thank you very much for being here today, for your presence, Jean-Michel, and for the presence of you all here in our class today. We will see you. I will see you. will not both of us know, but we will see you. Oh, I will see you next Wednesday in our next class. Thank you so much.
I want to see.
Les Français. Ça aurait été plus facile en français.
We have some students.
Okay. Of course. There will be friends.
I think we have friends.
Ah, okay.
They come. Ciao, Tequila. Bye bye. Ciao, Nuno. Yeah, we have German students because very much because we have so we have
Okay.
but they learn a lot with them.
I think it's very difficult for me because I didn't know if they already know that I was speaking about. It's difficult to yeah. Vous parlez toutes les langues. Just to find the right bon curseur, le mot not too easy to difficult. Sometimes I not very okay. When do
I have to even if I didn't move all around the country. Sometimes I
it's difficult to get their attention. It's late.
But
Okay.
I learned very much.
I do. I'm afraid that my English accent was not very, but maybe for
Not a problem. No.
For French, for English students, it would have been a nightmare, but maybe for
Yes.
thank you.
Even I speak in English. What choice to speak in
It's
English?
my first time I give a lesson in English in France. I speak in French, and I feel very more confident in French than in English. It's difficult.
No, it was very good. I'm
Okay.
going to just to close this.
Yes. And, yes, yeah.
Okay, you have here, congratulations on the acquisition. It's interesting to understand the selection process. What we know at the European Union, in addition to the will rely on qualifications in many people. And it is important today. It's important today in this people, including to research for creative alliance that promotes.
Quite a nice comment.
Yes, very nice comment.
Excellent. Okay.